Welcome to the Sacred Window podcast. My name is Christine Devlinek. The Sacred Window refers to the tender, magical, and remarkable weeks following the birth of a baby. A birth giver is forever changed. Recognizing that this time is too often overlooked and misunderstood in our modern culture, we're setting out to be part of a voice for change and growth. We're growing awareness and broadening the reach of conscious postpartum care. Our podcast features friends and colleagues as interviewers. We're a loving community united by a common passion to change the paradigm of postpartum care to one that honors women, birth givers, babies, and families. We're glad you're here.
And I will never be the same again.
Hello, welcome to the Sacred Window podcast. My name is Christine Devlinek. I'm so pleased to be here today with our guest, Danielle Hanna. Danielle is the founder of Living Arts Ayurveda. She's a longtime teacher of Ayurveda for students of yoga. She's a practitioner. She works with individuals and families in Ayurvedic care, but also conscious postpartum care. Danielle's a mom. She is really, I am so blown away by the breadth of experience and study. Danielle is, someone who is a forever student who really finds the connection and value in so many areas of care in which it can be combined to support people. She's a master's of arts in Ayurveda, Ayurvedic practitioner. She's done extensive yoga teacher training. She studied with us at the Center for Sacred Window Studies and has been certified through DONA. And Danielle lives and practices in Portland, Oregon. I'm so pleased to have you, Danielle. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Danielle and I have been connecting recently and exploring the idea of how we can create accessibility. Ayurveda is this vast lifetimes of understanding and integration and practice and study. And when people first enter into, are introduced to Ayurveda, oftentimes it can feel overwhelming. And as, seekers of health, seekers of feelings of wellness, of being better in balance with the world, which we are all seeking to do in different ways. I think we as practitioners who have studied Ayurveda and incorporate that into our caregiving have this unique opportunity to make it accessible and make it inviting and help craft a unique path for the individual in a way that Ayurveda becomes something that they coexist with, rather than this, I'm doing this Ayurvedic thing. It's like recognizing Ayurveda as part of the human experience and how we can flow with that. So, our conversation today is really inspired by this idea of integrating the beauty of Ayurveda for people who are just coming into contact with it. And of course, we're going to explore Danielle's beautiful path as well. But I'm really grateful to you, Danielle, for inspiring this conversation. And thank you.
Thank you very much. An important concept, especially more and more these days, this idea that we in a living organic art form as a way of being, and that we can use the good science of life, that is the meaning of Ayurveda, towards as a platform and weaving the art form into that. It makes a lot of good sense.
Well, and I love how, your practice is called Living Arts Ayurveda, and you really, I think the way that you explain Ayurveda, the way that you embody it is this beautiful art, looking at and understanding life and the way we live it as this, beautiful, creative experience that to me opens up all these new windows of how to view what I'm experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's really beautiful.
One thing that has really come forward over the years of my own study and practice is how do I be in relation to these practices, to these sciences, meaning Ayurveda and yoga, in a authentic way. And for me, that means learning about the science of these ancient practices and how the science can inform the way we live, no matter where we are from and what age we are in or stage of life.
So I'm curious, when I think for each of us who are students of Ayurveda, we sort of begin to integrate it in a way that is different from maybe when we first learned about it. It starts to become part of our existence and our being and our cells. And when you are first working with a client, maybe it's a parent or someone who's expecting or someone who's come to you for support and they may be new to Ayurveda, I think, speaking about like the science of Ayurveda, that's like a nice access point for Westerners because our medical system is so based in evidence and studies and scientific understanding of it. How do you bridge that gap with people who are new to Ayurveda?
Thank you. I think it's a really important question. When I work with new families, often I get to be in contact with them prior. When they're pregnant is common, though not always the case. And I get a chance to check in and tap into their world and see where things are. The time of postpartum is such a tender, highly transformative, I like to use the word sometimes, portal, that I know that that period isn't necessarily about trying to teach habits and practices that they might start right away with a list of things to do, but rather have an experience that shows really how the science and the art form so perfectly weave together to create healing, space, care, which are primary principles, foundational principles, mother principles, as we've learned in the Sacred Windows School, in the healing process in the postpartum period.
I love that, idea of, the science being woven in with the art because, postpartum, that window of time it has such an ethereal, such a subtle quality to it that really is natural for us to be accessing those qualities of being that are, more intuitive. They're like really heavily in feel, people are shifting. And I think when we're sort of up against that more concrete sort of scientific brain, it can be harder to navigate it with those, more earthy, fiery qualities when we're so, like nature has given us the strengths of these subtle, creative, sensitive, vulnerable ways of being. So I think helping people to see that that's part of the science rather than, the science is about this list of recommendations that I'm going to give you that you're going to then do. It's so much more about paying attention to how you're feeling and communicating that and honoring that, which is also part of the healing practice. It's really beautiful how they combine as they should.
Yeah, the word that comes to my mind as we're talking is, I often feel like this time is the liminal space. It is not defined by a linear time span, in the early postpartum time in particular. It's a very unique time frame. And in that the vata, as we well know, which is the energy of ether and air, or space and air, is high, and it really creates for this sort of very ethereal type of time if we can work with that. Also, what comes with it can be other feelings too, of anxiety and fear and worry and stress, for so many good reasons that are just very natural, because it can feel very overwhelming. And so it becomes such an important time to work with mother principles, with Ayurveda, to help bring in those feelings that can sort of lead us down that pathway of anxiety, fear, worry.
Yeah, I think about that so often recently because we've had discussions in our community recently about postnatal mood and anxiety disorders, and just sort of really looking at that stark contrast of the qualities in our everyday world around us in society and culture, and how that is so polar opposite to the qualities that nature provides for us during the postpartum window. And the difference in experience that people have when they have been cared for in a way that doesn't take away the struggle. It doesn't take away, the fact that it's a challenging time in many ways. We're healing. Healing is not effortless.
No.
Yet when there's people paying attention and acknowledging that the body and the mind and the heart and the spirit and the family are going through something that's big, and there's pillars in place with a net to support them in all these different creative ways. It's like there's not one way to support someone. It's many different combinations of ways, but the way that hardship or challenge is experienced is different than it would be without that awareness, without those different pieces that have thoughtfully been put in place to support what is understood to be a challenging time. It's like looking back on it, people see the bliss, they see the beauty, and they can acknowledge that, oh yeah, that was hard, but it doesn't rock them into from a place that causes lasting harm. It's like there's resiliency, that ojas, I feel like people are able to be more resilient. And that's what I'm so curious about and in awe of, the power that we have as caregivers, and the gifts of Ayurveda. I mean, when I think about my own experience being introduced and then studying Ayurveda, and how I feel like I've been able to explain it to people who have come into my care, it's like I tell them that you are Ayurveda. You are your own Ayurvedic teacher because you are alive and you're experiencing the qualities of being alive. And Ayurveda for me has been this opening into paying attention to what my body is teaching me. It's not so much like I now need to know all these other things so that I can understand myself. It's just simply paying attention to places and things and rhythms that I wasn't paying attention to before, which I find so beautiful and so accessible.
Yeah. If I think one of the things that really drew me to Ayurveda in the earlier years was the beauty of the dinacharya, the daily routine. As I continued to study more and more over the years, one thing I noticed to be true was no matter what the disease process was or where the imbalance was, a daily practice of taking care of oneself was always important, or is always important. And it made me really think about daily health prevention and the things that we can do to take care of ourselves as a center point of living in a way that our culture doesn't necessarily, well, at least here in the US, or maybe I should say, from what I see mostly, we don't necessarily have the underpinning in our society that places that in importance. And so many other cultures around the world do take care of themselves in these foundational ways. When these things are in place daily, it really begins to change the network of our health, like the very core of who we are. The tissues are built differently, the blood, the lymph, the bones, everything is different, and especially when done over a long period of time, so that when we come into times of life, if we are having children, we might have an underpinning in place or not. And also we can pick it up and start going with it as an important daily way of being. That I think it requires a bit of a paradigm shift, honestly, from where things are in our culture. It requires moving to center, taking care of oneself in small ways each and every day, and that might change based off of time of life and season and where we are. When I really got into my practices of Ayurveda, even though I had been a long time yoga practitioner, but when I really decided to commit more, I was in the stage of parenting, early active parenting, and as a single parent. And my kids were young, 7, 9, 6 and 8, something around that. And I didn't have this incredible amount of time every day to spend and practice. And I think that I really learned that was okay. But what really did matter, what really I believe does matter, is that we come to it each and every day in some way. That connection from within our own selves, that connection, when we take that and bring it over to the postpartum period, which is already such a highly transformative time, can be fostered and grown in a very unique way that extends out to the family.
Oh, it's so true. Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Danielle. I'm curious. Oh gosh, so many things just like flooded my head as I was listening to you. But yeah, one thing that I want to say before I forget is that it's interesting because I notice with a lot of people, they've prepared for the postpartum window, they get their helpers, they get their routine, and their bodies, their tissues, their whole self like responds and begins to heal very quickly, and their energy comes back, and they feel they're like riding this flood of like nutrition that's being given to them. And as we know, during one of those special windows of time, which postpartum is, that Kaya Kalpa window, when we provide what is needed, it's like a supercharge of healing. Like the body's like, yes, like we're doing this. And then it's like when the help ends, when the doulas go home, when the family and friends kind of draw back the extra help, and that like the routines start to slip. It's like, maybe it's those routines that, if what you're saying, if we can continue to like show up for ourselves in some way that's intentional every single day, maybe that can really be a buffer for that sort of crash or that sort of dose of reality. It's almost like the honeymoon's over, folks. It's like, this is real now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think about that. I'm curious, how you would maybe guide clients in finding gentle routines. Cause I think the word routine can like scare people. It's almost like, your New Year's resolution, you almost hate to make it because you don't want to disappoint yourself when you stop doing it. And I'm curious how you encourage people in ways that work, for establishing a routine that's appropriate for when we don't have a lot of time to give ourselves.
Yeah, I think there can be some gentle reminders that can help facilitate it. One thing I'm thinking about right now is I just wrote a blog about this. When I get to work with a new parent, one of the things that I do is I bring them I did a collaborative project with a friend of mine, and we made these golden cups and pottery. She's a ceramic artist, and we made these cup/bowls that are golden in color. And when I work with a parent, the first thing I do is I give them this cup and I say, fill your cup every day in some way, whether it be water or soup or laughter or tears. Each day, come to it. This was inspired by the book, The Fourth Trimester by Kimberly Ann Johnson, where she kind of talks briefly about this. The idea behind that is a reminder that each day we come to ourselves. And so even if it's the smallest thing, it still matters. And so I like to use metaphor often and use different creative tools to help support people in a reminder of how much their health also matters every single day.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I think it also just gives that open invitation to making the routine theirs, rather than giving people a routine that we think would be beneficial for them, like allowing them to really connect with what is actually important in that moment.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I believe that they're just like any science that we can study. There are certainly things that we can learn about ourselves that are inherently true that might be different from other people. We are such our own unique piece of art in and of ourselves. No two one of us is the same. So there are things that we can learn from the science of life, from Ayurveda, that can help us work with our own inherent nature. And so it's good to understand those things. It's good to understand our own nature. And there's nothing like parenthood to help us understand, learn about our own selves in that way. And we can, I love the idea that you're saying of making it our own, because I do believe that it is true. When we make it our own, it becomes to have meaning, right? It becomes important to us and not a list of things to do that is given to us by somebody else, but rather something that is intrinsically and inherently useful and helpful to us, that we can feel each and every day. Even if it is seemingly small, it might not be at all in the quality and energy.
We have a lot more to say on this. We're going to take a very quick short break. Again, I'm here with the wonderful Danielle Hanna. We're going to be right back and talk a little bit more about the power and the simple things, and hear more about Danielle's story as well. Stay with us. The sacred window is an idea that we can all find ourselves in need of during times of our lives where we are tender, in need of extra care, and transforming our understanding of self. The concepts of care we give to new parents can be applied to ourselves in honor of ourselves to build resilience and grace in how we navigate this life. Okay, so Danielle, we left off and you were so beautifully talking about how the small things can be not small at all, and I every day that I am alive, like I understand that more, particularly when life becomes really, really big and there's so much there that's drawing our attention. And how I think we have this beautiful opportunity with this tool that we have, which is our minds. When we put our attention and our intention into a practice, which could be filling that cup with water and sitting down and noticing how the water tastes in our mouth and envisioning how it is nourishing the tissues of our body. Like, we have this opportunity to create so much more benefit out of just walking through life each day. It's like like the yoga of action, the yoga of doing, the yoga of being. And I'm so curious as to how, I mean, to me, that fits so beautifully in with helping others to see the value in picking out what they do every day and making it a sacred routine, making it into something, rather than like, oh, now I have to like start this complicated, dinacharya. And if I don't do it now, I'm going to feel guilty or give myself a hard time because I didn't do it. Like there's so much, I think, in the things that we do each day that if we bring intention to them, they then can become part of this routine that sustains us in a really powerful way.
Yeah, it's reminding me of the very simple saying, where the mind goes, energy flows, or where energy goes, the mind flows. When we set out with a certain intention on a way that we show up into the world, I believe our environment, our direct environment right around us, can respond to that, and that complications that we create from it is more because it comes from the outside in as opposed from the inside out. Meaning a little bit about what we were just talking about, when we feel intrinsically connected to how we care for ourselves and build intention, awareness, and thought to that, it creates something that changes our relationship to it. And that becomes like the tow hook into establishing a lifetime of practice that doesn't feel like an obligation, but feels more like an essential part of who I am. The tricky part of this, in my opinion, at least, is that we as the culture don't have a lot of this languaging or understanding built in. And so maybe we get introduced to it or come to it at different times or stages in our life. And maybe one of those times might be the postpartum, for postpartum care, or during pregnancy even too. And so we don't necessarily have the built pathways in our body for that. And then being a new parent and trying to start that along with other things can feel really overwhelming, at least in my opinion. It can have that quality. And there can be a sense of guilt around, oh, well, my doula or my Ayurvedic practitioner or my doctor wants me to take care of myself, and I'm so busy doing taking care of baby and learning how to even get into the shower for 2 minutes. How do I even think about creating and building a routine or self-care in some way? When I feel that sense, when I'm working with someone and I feel or witness that quality, it's a time for me to really pause and support in a way that gives more of a felt sense of something, so that there can be a connection through the sense body, whether it is through aromatics or music or breathing or something that tastes really good. We can grab onto how that feels within us and use that as a springboard to help support a shift and change that says, oh, this is actually not a series and a list of things to do from the outside, but rather this really is effective and helps support and change my perception. There is a philosophical system associated with Ayurveda and yoga called Samkhya philosophy. And part of that system teaches us that our senses are what make our perception, which then create our reality. When we work through the senses, we can really experience a shift in how we feel from the inside and also from the outside. And this is, to me, a way begin to feel how we can make these practices really be living and a part of who we are.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. Thank you, Danielle, for sharing that particular way of viewing it, because I think, so often we can go through the day having so much sensory input that we almost stop paying attention to it. But it's, this part of being awake, that we experience, when we're eating, when we're taking in, sound, when we're smelling, and being able to recognize that ability as an access point for creating a connection. I'm curious for you in your personal story. I think about that almost there's like a crossing over point where people, you spoke about it earlier, where you all of a sudden start recognizing this need for routine as an essential part of your day. And I almost compare it to like runners who get into that, like the runner's high, where they've crossed over into this rhythm that it's no longer as effortful as it was before. And I will fully admit, I have never experienced a runner's high.
Me neither.
But I think about that because I've heard speak of this runner's high that sounds very wonderful. But it popped in my head as this sort of, where was that crossover for you personally, where, your routine became so woven in with your understanding of what a good day was, or how, like, what you needed, that it became more effortless?
Yeah, I love that question. Well, I think that one thing that I have learned is that it's never rote, that I every day make sure that I spend just a little bit of time to keep it alive and well in my being. I don't take it for granted, but I really remember the time when that was. I was in school studying Ayurveda more formally at this point, and I was in a very hard time of life and had to make decisions that were scary and life-changing and hurt the people that I cared about the most a lot. And that felt hard. And I was a longtime yoga practitioner at that point, and starting to learn a lot more about self-care and what it meant to take care of me. And in school, I was getting the science and the understanding fed to me. So I was in good company and good community, which I think is really important when we're studying and trying to learn something new and set new pathways. And I often felt overwhelmed with life, with parenting, with single parenting, with starting a business, with having my mother at the time was very ill, and recognizing that was also a part of life too. And one thing that I started really recognizing in my own self with morning practice was how much better I felt in the day, how my energy was more sustained, more even. I had better awareness and a greater sense of bandwidth when I would spend some time each morning taking care of myself, so that I could frame my day in such a way that I felt connected. And as I started making that choice each day in small ways, and I started really feeling the visceral change and seeing the change within my own self, through practice and repetition, through community support, through learning and engagement, and through the over and over again devotion of it, I crossed over. I started seeing that I am a better person when I do this for myself, I'm a better parent. I am a better human. I am a better teacher and also practitioner. And when I do, all of those things feel so much more connective. And when I don't, I feel that difference. I feel tired. I feel more frayed at the edges. I feel my own skeletons in the closet step forward and get really noisy. And all of that, it seemed to me to be wise action to do what I needed to do to change that in the ways that I could. I can't control anybody else or what happens out in the world, but I can have a say in the way that I see it, manage it, and deal with it. And that has helped me so much. And so that piece, even though it takes years, I think sometimes, especially if it's not brought in from an early stage of life, it takes years, I think, to make it your own. But the process of it is a very living experience. And just like parenting, where you get to show up every single day to whatever is happening, it's the same in my own practice. And so all of those things, I think, sort of created a braid that helped me grab onto something that says, this really matters. This is a way of living that I can feel that I can participate in and show up for, and that it really makes a difference. Once I started feeling that, it became easier to show up. And also my practices became so much more intimate to me. You know, they feel like a really great pair of worn shoes that fit me perfectly, right? Like it's just, it is who I am now, many, many, many years later. So I think that's a little bit of that history.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I love that listening to your story of how that began for you in a place that was hard, that was, a darker time in your life. And I think, I'm like really seeing right now in my own experience as well, when things get real, and it's not an easy time, like when it's kind of an emergency for me to create some, care to like address whatever acute situation. It's like, what if we can look at those times as this gift, this opportunity to experience a type of care and attention for ourselves, that, when things are kind of just rolling along and we're good, I think it's easier to overlook what we need.
Yeah.
But when things become harder, it's the gift in that is that we're forced to stop and pay attention. And the opportunity is that we can keep paying attention when things start to get good again. And the wisdom that you experience, that you were sharing and that you were embodying, of this creates a better life for me, a better life experience when I do this. And you were able to see the difference and keep it going and really make it into something that was reflective of you, the authentic, beautiful pieces of you. And I think that's, in Ayurveda, we see each individual as solely themselves, and what reaches them, what balances them, what calls to each of us, what resounds uniquely just right for each of us, is something that we get to discover ourselves. Do that with the help of a provider, a consultant, an Ayurvedic professional. Ultimately, it's a very personal process. So I really love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, this is, I think, a topic that, again, like, each of us has this opportunity to find routine and find what works for each of us, and the recognition that that will look different. As we kind of begin to close our conversation, I guess I'm curious from you, Danielle, in your experience, how has your routine grown and shifted as you've grown and shifted?
Yeah, it definitely has changed over the years. Personally, I find myself in the precipice of the empty nest phase of life, which is a whole new ball game and has a very similar quality to the time when I stepped into parenting. And that in itself was a whole new experience of like, oh, wow, this is just a completely different phase of life. I find myself now sort of standing at the field of the harvest of the years of my parenting life and my children stepping out into their own selves. And that leaves me in a different relationship to time, especially for my own self. It also leaves me feeling like, what do I get to do to be in conversation and community and give back into the world? Because I recognize in my own self that we are only as strong as the community around us, both that we literally see every day, but also that live around us that we might not necessarily see. So that piece of community support feels even more important as I age. And I think my relationship to living in a way that feels very aligned to the things that are important to me has grown. And that living in an art form that embodies all aspects of being, not only for myself and for my family, but also for the greater community as well, is important. And my thoughts have really been there a lot more as I find my relationship to time changing.
I'm so in awe of how we get that opportunity to have like new worlds of perception open up to us as we move through life. And it's such a pleasure to listen to you describe, how that has shifted for you. I guess, one question that I've been asking people recently that I would love to hear from you is, in the sacred window to me is sort of this, it's this very specific window of time, yet the way that we heal and the way that we should explore caring for ourselves and for others during that time is very synchronous with so many other times of life and situations in life, which is one thing I love about studying it, is because it's continuously applicable. And both, today, thinking about this present moment, sometimes I think, I tend to get really theoretical and sort of, universal about everything. But when I really look at like my moment right now, and I'm inviting you to like look at your moment, what that and that you embody about the sacred window and the care there is applicable for you in this moment.
I think one of the things that I love about working in this postpartum window in the tender liminal space is that it reminds me every day of the type of care that I want to have in my own life and that I want to see in the world for everybody in different aspects. The idea of slowing down and taking care of oneself and being in connected community is applicable for me right now as much as it was in that postpartum window. And I agree with you about Ayurveda always coming to meet me, taking care of me, no matter the season of life. I have classically or historically worked in menopause, and perimenopause has kind of been a lot of my background. And one thing that I have learned in Ayurveda is that the time period in menopause is exactly similar to the time period in postpartum. And so as I meet with new parents and get to take care and find support for them, it is an active daily reminder of the type of care and support that I welcome into my life and in my world at this time. And that feels very applicable and totally what's up in my world at this time.
Beautiful, beautiful. Danielle, I'm really inspired by you, and I really appreciate the care that you bring to your community and to the world. And I'm so grateful that we have connected with one another through this work.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me, Christine, and for the continued conversation and love and care and devotion that you all bring through the Sacred Window School of teaching not only practitioners, but also families how to care for themselves and each other.
It is truly an honor, truly. I would love for all of our listeners to visit your work and your website. You can find Danielle at livingartsayurveda.com. And we're going to put more information on Danielle and her beautiful work in the show notes. You can always reach out to us, sacredwindowstudies.com, for furthering your journey in sacred postpartum care, conscious postpartum care. And thank you all for all you bring and all you do. And Danielle, we will meet again soon.
Thank you.
Shanti, Shanti.
How can you bring something sacred to your current window of time? What do you have to offer to someone within their sacred window? We honor you for all you give and for who you are. Thank you for listening. The Sacred Window podcast is brought to you by the Center for Sacred Window Studies. You can visit us to find out more about our online training and mentoring programs, plus resources and products for and about the sacred postpartum window at www.sacredwindowstudies.com. Editing of our podcast recordings is done by Sienna Butler, and our music is written and performed by Sarah Emmett. You can hear more of Sarah's music by visiting www.sarahemmett.bandcamp.com.